The longing that comes from War of the World suddenly became two completely different worlds. On one side, war, cold, dirty, inhumane, a place where the smell of gunpowder mixed with the smell of mud, sweat, and fear, where the sky seemed grey, no matter if it was day or night, where men, once sons, husbands, boyfriends, were now just numbers, uniforms, targets, trying to survive each new dawn. On the other side, the weight, silent, painful, a different kind of war, waged against absence, against the emptiness of the house, against the silence that occupies every space, where every sound coming from the street could be good news, or the worst telegram of life. Victor was there, in the middle of the front, in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by trenches, barbed wire, knee-deep mud and gunfire that cut the air like invisible blades. Sometimes he would look at his hands, covered in dirt, blood and grease, and wonder, how did this happen? How did I get from our field, our oak tree, to this? And in the midst of all this chaos, there was only one thing that kept him going: Alina, her face, her smile, the smell of her hair, the memory of the way she held his hand, the red ribbon he carried with him, folded and tucked into the inside pocket of his uniform, close to his heart. The nights were the worst. When the sound of gunfire stopped, the silence was deafening, because in the silence, the enemy was no longer the one on the other side of the trench. It was longing, it was fear, it was the doubt, it was that cruel question that insisted on echoing in my mind: will I come back? Will she see me again? On the other side, in the village, Elena was also fighting her own war. Every dawn was a battle against despair. Every sunset, a victory for having survived another day without him. She slept, hugging the letters he had left before he left, and, even though she knew they said things she already knew by heart, she read and reread them, as if the words had the power to bring him back, even if only for a few minutes. He promised he would come back. He would whisper many times, to the emptiness of the room, "I will wait, as long as it takes. But come back to me, ... please." The days began to be marked, no longer by the calendar, but by the arrival, or lack thereof, of letters. When the postman appeared on the corner, her heart would race, her legs would tremble, her hands would sweat, and when he passed by, the pain was almost physical, as if the little hope she had left was being ripped away from her, once again. For Victor, writing became a survival ritual. In the midst of the bombings, during the few breaks, I would take a piece of paper, sometimes dirty and crumpled, and write. I couldn't always send it, but I wrote, as if, in that act, he managed to transport himself far away from there, as if, for a few minutes, he was just Victor again. Not the soldier, not the number, not the target, only Victor, the man who loved Alina more than anything in the world. "My love, everything here is dark, everything is cold, everything is empty. But when I close my eyes, I see you, and for a few seconds, everything becomes more bearable. You keep me standing, you save me every day, even without knowing it. I love you, and I'll come back. I promised, and I'll keep it." Alina wrote too. Even without knowing if the letters would arrive, even without knowing if he was alive, if he was well, even without knowing if, on the other side of the world, someone would read them. But she wrote, because writing was her way of surviving, of transforming longing into words, of transforming pain into love. Here, everything is the same. The flowers still bloom near the oak tree. The children still run around the village, but nothing is the same without you. Even the wind seems colder. Even the sound of the tracks seems sadder. I'll wait for you, Victor. I'll wait, as long as it takes. Until the last day, if necessary. It was as if, separated, by miles, by bombs, by guns, and by chaos, they could still touch each other, feel each other, love each other. Because, while the war tried to destroy them, longing did the opposite. Longing kept them alive. Longing was the invisible thread that connected to worlds that were so different, but that, somehow, still existed within each other. And, in the end, that longing, as cruel as it was also love. It was living proof that no matter where they were, no matter how much time passed, they were still one heart. The first envelope arrived stained, crumpled, with worn edges, as if it had traveled the world itself before reaching her. But it was there, with her name, handwritten, in the corner of the yellowed paper. The simple act of holding that letter made Elena's chest tremble. Her hands shook so much that for a few seconds, she couldn't even open it. She just held it to her chest, as if embracing something sacred, as if holding a piece of her own heart. And then, he took a deep breath, held the paper in both hands and, with almost reverent care, unfolded it. His eyes ran over the lines, and as the words unfolded, tears began to fall, one by one, silent, hot, painful, but, at the same time, full of life. My Elena, ... my life, my love, ... Those first words were like a breath of fresh air in the midst of the suffocation she had been experiencing since the day she saw him leave on that train. The writing was shaky, smudged in some places, but unmistakable. It was him. It was Victor there, in every line, in every letter, in every piece of that dirty, yellowed paper. He was. I don't know how to start this letter, because honestly, I don't even know if it will reach you. But if, by some miracle, these words cross the fields, the tracks, the winds, and reach your hands, I want you to know that, despite everything, ... I'm here, alive, thinking of you, only of you. Elena pressed the paper to her face, smelling the paper, as if she could somehow smell him too. As if those lines, dirty with mud, sweat, fear and love, were capable of crossing any distance, any war, any abyss. The days here are long, my love, so long, ... and the nights. Oh, the nights are worse, because when the sound of the gunshots stops, what's left is silence, and it's in this silence that your voice echoes, that your face appears, that the sound of your laughter saves me. I close my eyes and return to our village. I return to the oak tree. I return to you. She didn't know whether to cry, smile, or do both at the same time. She only knew that those words, more than anything, more than any hug, were now what kept her alive. What made the heart, even though tight, even though broken, keep beating. I love you, Elena, and never, not even for a second, forget that. Because it's this love that keeps me standing. It's what makes me get up when fear tries to knock me down. It's what makes me resist when everything around me screams for me to give up. You are my life, and I'll come back, I promised, and I'll keep it. When she finished reading, her hands were shaking so badly, she almost dropped the paper, and then she realized she was smiling through her tears. A weak, crooked, broken smile, but a smile nonetheless. Because, for the first time in days, there was something beyond the fear, beyond the emptiness. There was him, there was love, there was hope, and it wasn't just one. In the days, weeks and months that followed, other letters began to arrive, not always in the time she wanted. Sometimes they took weeks, others, months, some probably never arrived. And, in the same way, some of what she wrote may never have crossed the battlefield. But it didn't matter, because every letter that arrived was a piece of him coming to her. It was as if, for a few minutes, the war disappeared, as if the world were just the two of us again, as if the oak tree was still there, as a witness, watching them talk, dream, love. Elena also wrote, every day, sometimes long, letters full of details about the village, the weather, the flowers that grew near the square. Others, shorter, just to say, I love you, I'll wait for you, please, ... come back to me. She kept his letters in a wooden box that her father had built when she was a child, and every night, before going to sleep, she would open that box, choose any letter, read it, hug it, and for a few minutes, she could pretend that he was there, that he had never left, that the war was just a nightmare from which everyone would soon wake up. And, in the midst of so much fear, so much pain, so much silence, those letters were life. They were breaths of love, in a world that seemed to have forgotten how to breathe. Because, in the end, those scribbled lines, stained by war, wet with tears, were much more than ink on paper. They were promises, they were memories, they were the invisible thread that kept two hearts beating, even when the whole world seemed to want them to stop. Time, which was once an ally, was now Elena's greatest enemy. Before, the days were numbered by the blossoming of the seasons, by village birthdays, by spring festivals, by walks in the countryside, by gatherings under the old oak tree. Now, each dawn was just another day to be overcome. A weight, a cruel reminder that he wasn't there yet, that he hasn't come back yet. So Dade was not just a feeling, no, he was a constant presence, a ghost that followed her through every room in the house, who sat next to her at the breakfast table, who walked beside her through the streets of the town, who lay with her every night, and who, above all, woke up with her every morning. Longing was now his most faithful companion, more cruel, more painfully alive. The sound of the tracks, which had once been music, became torture. Every time a train passed, her chest tightened, her hands sweated, her heart raced, and for a second, Alina allowed herself to believe, it's him, he's back, he's coming for me, only to see the train passing by seconds later, without stopping, on its way, taking hope with it. Once again, the box of letters became her most precious treasure, but it was also her greatest source of pain. She opened it, read it, and reread it. Sometimes, she didn't even need to open it. She just held the box against her chest and closed her eyes, imagining his voice, imagining his arms, imagining everything that, at that moment, was just a memory. My love, you never leave my mind. I count the days, even without knowing how many are left. Sometimes, I catch myself looking at the sky and wondering if you're looking at it right now. And if you are, I want you to know, I feel you, here, inside me, in every beat of my heart, said one of the letters. But when the letters were delayed, despair set in, fear, anguish, the kind of silence that is not just an absence of sound, but an absence of air, of ground, of meaning. There was one week, especially, when no letters arrived, none, not a line, no news, nothing. And in that time, Alina discovered what true pain was. It wasn't just missing it, it was not knowing. It was the emptiness of not knowing, of not having an answer, from imagining 1,000 scenarios, and almost always, the worst ones. She walked through the village, looking into people's faces, searching for any sign, any look of pity, any whisper, any gesture that might mean someone knew something, something she feared but desperately needed not to be true. She would sit on the bench in the square, clutch the handkerchief he had given her before he left, and stare at the horizon, for hours, without speaking, without moving, just waiting. Because, deep down, she knew that waiting, at that moment, was all she could do, and time, that merciless executioner, made a point of not cooperating. The hours dragged on, the days seemed like weeks, the weeks, months, and every second without him was a knife stuck in my chest, turning slowly, tearing everything apart inside. On the other side, amidst the noise of bombs, the smell of gunpowder, the mud that seemed to never dry, Victor was also counting the days. I counted, and lost count, because there, on the front, time had no meaning. It was as if each dawn was stolen by the uncertainty of whether there would be a sunset, as if every sunset was possibly the last. But, even there, in the midst of the chaos, the longing was no less. On the contrary, longing was, at the same time, what hurt the most, and what kept him alive. The most, because it was her. It was Alina. It was the memory of the smile, the touch, the smell, the look. It was all this that made Victor cling to life with tooth and nail, that made you resist, even when everything told you to give up. If I come back, it's for you. If I fight, it's for you. And if I survive all this, my love, it's because I love you more than life itself, he wrote, his hands shaking, sometimes in the dark, sometimes amid the noise of machine guns. So, longing was just that. It was pain, it was weight, it was agony. But, paradoxically, it was also love. It was memory. It was living proof that, despite the distance, the fear, the war, two hearts still beat to the same beat. They still searched for each other in the wind, in the stars, in their thoughts. They still belonged to each other. And in that time that seemed to never pass, both Victor and Alina understood that sometimes this is what love is. It's fighting against time itself, against destiny itself, against the universe itself. Love is, often, just ... waiting. War has a strange way of redefining what really matters. In the midst of gunfire, explosions, and screams, when life is reduced to seconds, there are things that become more precious than any shelter, than any weapon, than any protection. For Victor, this treasure had a name, a smell, a face, and a voice that he could hear even in the deafening silence of the front, Alina. And it was for her, and only for her, that he made each sheet of paper a refuge, each scribbled line a bridge that, somehow, managed to cross the chaos of war and reach her heart, even if it was miles away. Victor wrote, every day, without fail. It didn't matter if the ammunition was running out, if hunger was pressing, or if the cold seemed to want to freeze the bones. Whenever he could, he would find a corner, sometimes a muddy trench, sometimes the shade of a twisted tree, and, when there was nowhere to sit, he would make a makeshift table out of his own leg. The paper often came from what was left over from supply boxes, old newspapers, or scraps of unused maps. The pen didn't always work, and when there was no paint, he used charcoal, broken pencils, or whatever was at hand. Because, there, in that place where everything seemed to lose its meaning, words were the only thing that still made sense. My love, today I woke up to the sound of gunshots, closer than ever. But oddly enough, I woke up smiling, because I dreamed of you. I dreamed that we were in the oak tree, looking at the stars, laughing, as if none of this existed. And for a few seconds, when I opened my eyes, I could almost smell you. I could almost hear your laughter. He wrote, his fingers stained with mud, grease, life. He didn't know if the letters would arrive. He didn't know if someone would find them along the way, if they would be carried away by the wind, by the rain, by the war itself. But, still, he wrote, because, in that simple act, so simple, yet so grand, he remained alive. He kept love alive. He kept Alina alive inside him, and he, alive inside her. There were days when the words came easily. They flowed like water from a stream. He talked about his memories, about the village, about how much he missed her, the smell of the flowers, the sound of the tracks, the texture of her hands in his. And on those days, the longing, however cruel, seemed, for a few minutes, to turn into hope. But there were other days, days when words hurt, when the fear was so great that even the act of writing seemed like a risk. Writing I love you on a piece of paper, while bombs exploded just a few meters away, was almost a cry of defiance against fate itself. As if, by recording that love, he was saying to the world, they can take everything from me, except this, except her, except us, Alina, if I don't come back. If this letter is all that's left of me, ... Know that I loved you more than anything in this world, and that you were, are, and always will be ... the best part of me, she wrote, with tears in her eyes, knowing that, perhaps, those were words of farewell, but refusing to accept that as the truth. And sometimes, there was no paper, no pen, just him, the grey sky, the smell of death in the air, and yet, he moved his lips into the void, as if dictating a letter to the wind itself, as if he trusted that, somehow, the words, even without being written, would find their way to her. On this side, Alina felt it. She felt it when he was writing. She couldn't explain it. She didn't know where that sudden tightness in her chest came from, that uncontrollable urge to look up at the sky, to press the red ribbon against her chest, to close her eyes and whisper, I love you too, I'm waiting for you too. And in a way, by writing, Victor remained whole, because in war, everything could be taken away, security, comfort, peace, even life, but love, no one could steal. And every line he drew was a piece of that love. It was a piece of him, a piece of them. The letters, stained, torn, dirty, were more than paper and ink. They were monuments. They were declarations of resistance. They were witnesses that even when everything seems lost, there is still something worth fighting for. And on that battlefield, in the midst of a world that seemed to have forgotten what it was to be human, Victor remained human. Because every day, even surrounded by death, he chose to write about life, about love, about Alina, and that made all the difference. The silence of the house seemed to scream. Every room, every object, every corner, everything reminded him. Everything reminded Victor. The smell of the clothes hanging out, the cup he always used, the bench on the porch where they would sit watching the sunset, the marks of his fingers on the window glass, left on the last day, on the last morning. And it was in that silence, heavy, cutting, that Alina found refuge in words. If you couldn't hear him, if you couldn't touch him, if you couldn't hug him, then writing was perhaps the only way to stay close, to keep him close. Every day he sat at the table. The notebook was open, the inkwell was next to it, the trembling hands holding the quill, and for a few seconds he just stared at the blank sheet of paper, a leaf that, so often, seemed cruel. Because how could she put into words everything she felt? How can we translate into sentences the tightness in our chest, the pain, the longing, the fear, and above all, love? And then he would begin, sometimes slowly, feeling his way through the first words, other times, desperately, as if he didn't write everything down fast enough, his emotions would overflow and escape through his eyes, his mouth, his hands. Victor, my love, you are so missed here. It's like the world has stopped since you left. Like everything is suspended, frozen, waiting, waiting for you. I walk through the village and everything reminds me of you. The bench in the square, the field near the oak tree. Even the sound of the rails seems to repeat your name. I miss you so much that sometimes it seems like I don't even know how to breathe without you here. He wrote about the days, about the simple things, about the flowers that started to bloom near the window, about the smell of bread coming out of the oven, about how the sunset seemed sadder without him there. The oak tree is more beautiful than ever, you know. The leaves are so green, so full of life, but at the same time, looking at it hurts, because it's impossible not to remember us there, sitting, holding hands, dreaming of the future that now seems so distant, so uncertain. But often, when I finished, I would stare at that sheet of paper full of words, and fear would arise. The fear that you wouldn't read it, the fear that the letter wouldn't arrive, the fear, above all, that he wouldn't be there to read it anymore. And then, he would carefully fold the paper, put it in an envelope, write his name in the most beautiful handwriting he could manage, and for a few minutes, he would hold that envelope against his chest. Is he okay? Will he get it? Is he still alive? This question whispered in the back of her mind, like an echo that she tried to silence, but that always came back, always came back. There were days when I would go to the station, ready to deliver the letter to the postman, and when I got there, I simply couldn't do it. My hands would shake, my legs would feel like they were made of stone, and, in silence, I would return home, holding that envelope as if I were holding a piece of my own soul. It wasn't just fear that the letter would get lost. It was also fear that by sending those words, they would become too real, too concrete. Because as long as they were on paper, kept there, in the box that now sat next to her bed, they were hers. They were secrets between her and her own heart. They were whispers that, if left unsaid, perhaps wouldn't need to be faced. There was also another reason, even more painful. Sometimes she didn't have the courage to write it all down. To say, for example, that on stormy nights, she slept on the living room floor because she couldn't stand the sound of thunder without remembering when he hugged her and told her that everything would be okay. Or that some mornings I just couldn't get up, who would spend hours staring at the ceiling, waiting for that day to pass, just so he could start another, and another, and another, until, one day, who knows, he would come back. If I tell you how much it hurts, will you be able to handle it? And if you know, will that make you suffer even more? There, in the middle of this war, he thought, as his eyes filled with tears and his chest tightened so much that it physically hurt. So, many letters never left. They never crossed the tracks, never faced the wind, the rain, the weather. They stayed there, stored, folded, hidden in the box next to the bed. Each one of them was a piece of her soul, a piece of love, a piece of longing. But even if they were never sent, they were still a way to keep him alive, to keep love alive. Because, in the end, writing was perhaps the only thing she could still do. And every time he closed a letter, holding it against his chest, he would whisper, almost like a prayer, "Come back to me, Victor, please, come back to me." And, in the silence of the room, in the silence of the village, in the silence that only longing knows how to create, that prayer mingled with the wind, in the hope that, somehow, it would find its way to him. There are silences that scream, silences that pierce more than any sound. And for Alina, it was this silence that, little by little, began to transform into the greatest of all terrors. For weeks, the letters simply stopped arriving. At first, she tried to fool herself. She looked for logical, rational excuses. Maybe the post office is late, maybe the tracks are washed out, maybe the letter is on its way. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks seemed like months, the knot in her chest tightened so much that sometimes it hurt to even breathe. The village postman, who had once been awaited as if waiting for a miracle, now seemed to carry a sentence. Every time he appeared around the corner, Alina ran to the window. She watched, she counted his steps, and when he passed by, her world simply collapsed once more. "Nothing for me today?" she asked, faking a smile, holding back the tears at the edges of her eyes. The postman, a simple man with calloused hands and a sad look, no longer knew what to say. He clutched his hat in his hands, shook his head silently, and walked on. Because sometimes, silence was all that could be offered to those waiting for something that might never come. In the village, everyone noticed. The looks began to change. The neighbors, who had previously greeted with smiles and words of encouragement, now looked away. They whispered. The whispered conversations at the fair, the pitying glances at the church door, the silent sighs of the women who knew, more than anyone, what that wait was like. Everything said without saying, maybe he won't come back. But Alina refused. He refused to accept, allowing that thought to take over. Because if I accepted it, if I let that possibility in, I didn't even know if I would be able to keep breathing. And yet, fear knocked. It knocked every day, every time someone knocked on the door. Every time she saw a man in uniform entering the village. Every time the sound of the tracks echoed louder. Because, more than waiting for a letter, she feared, above all, the day when it wouldn't be a letter that arrived, but a telegram, cold, short, cruel, a piece of paper capable of destroying an entire life, of tearing up a story, of tearing away, in one fell swoop, all the dreams, all the promises, all the love. There was one morning, in particular, that was etched in her memory forever. He had heard, still from afar, the sound of footsteps, heavy, different from the postman's footsteps, firmer, more measured. He got up from his chair so quickly that he almost knocked over the lantern. He ran to the window, his heart racing, his hands trembling, his chest tight, and he saw two men, in uniform, walking down the main street of the village. The blood drained from his face, his legs went weak. His stomach felt like it had sunk into an endless abyss. His hands gripped the edge of the window so tightly that his knuckles turned white. They walked slowly, as if they were carrying in their hands not only a role, but also the responsibility of destroying worlds. And for a few seconds that felt like hours, Alina couldn't move. No way. I just looked. He could only feel his own heart screaming inside his chest. The men stopped in front of one of the houses. It wasn't hers. She fell to her knees on the floor, her hands on her face, tears bursting forth, mixed with relief, guilt, and pain. Because, even though she wasn't the one who would receive that telegram, she knew, more than anyone, what that woman, there inside that house, was about to experience. Fear knocked on her door, not literally, but in every other way possible. And from that day on, she lived in constant alert. Every sound, every knock, every footstep on the street, every shadow, everything was a threat. Everything was, potentially, the announcement of the end. On the other side of the world, Victor was also struggling with a different kind of fear. Communication was becoming increasingly difficult. The battlefronts were moving fast. Camps were being destroyed, rebuilt, relocated. And often, he didn't even know if the letters he wrote would arrive. Or if, on the other side, Alina was still waiting for him. She was still alive. She was still resisting. My love, I don't know if this letter will find you. I don't even know if you're still there, waiting for me. But, if you are, know that every second, every step, every breath I take, is for you. For us. I promised I would come back. And, as long as I have the strength, I will fulfill it. I'll come back. I'll come back for you. And it was this promise, fragile and powerful at the same time, that kept them standing. That made Alina, even destroyed by fear, get up every day, open the window, look at the horizon, and whisper, "Come back to me, Victor. Come back." Because even when fear knocks on the door, love refuses to go away. Anyone who thinks that war is made up only of gunshots, explosions, and screams is mistaken. No, war, in fact, is made up, above all, of silences. Long, heavy, crushing silences. Silences that are often more cruel than the sound of death itself. And it was in this silence that Victor discovered a new kind of terror. Not that immediate terror that comes when bombs fall or when the sound of gunfire rips through the sky, but that terror that arrives when everything becomes too quiet, when the smell of gunpowder mixes with the smell of mud and dried blood, and all you hear is the sound of your own breathing, from the heart itself, beating so loudly that it seems to want to come out of the mouth. It was in these moments that the mind did its cruelest work, because when silence took over, the war was no longer outside, it was inside. Inside the head, inside the chest, inside the soul. And it was in this emptiness that the most frightening thoughts arose. Is she still there? Is she still waiting for me? Could it be that, on the other side, her world hasn't also fallen apart? Is she okay? Alive? Healthy? And, no matter how much I tried to push these questions away, they came like waves, one after the other, without stopping. The front was unstable. The battle lines changed every day. What was sheltered today was rubble tomorrow. What was a trench today was a crater tomorrow. And in the midst of this chaos, the letters simply stopped arriving. Victor asked his officers, his comrades, and the army's makeshift post office. They all said the same thing. The lines are down. No letters are coming in or going out. And it was then that Victor discovered that there is a kind of loneliness that has no sound, that cannot be explained, that has no face. It's the one that eats you up from the inside out, that turns even the sound of the wind into torture, that makes even silence seem louder than any explosion. At night, he would lie on the cold ground, in the middle of the mud, holding the red ribbon Alina had given him on the last day to his chest. He would hold it so tightly that he would often wake up with the mark of the ribbon embedded in his skin, as if it could somehow keep her close, as if that piece of fabric was now the most sacred thing he had in the world. I looked at the sky, and even when it was covered in smoke, in heavy clouds, I tried to find a star, any star, to whisper, "Are you looking at her too, Alina? Can you feel me there?" On the other side, the silence then became almost unbearable, because, in the midst of it, fear arose, the fear of not returning, the fear that, if he did return, she might not be there anymore, the fear, above all, that that love, so great, so strong, so beautiful, would not survive time, distance, war. But no matter how much the fear pressed, no matter how much the silence crushed, there was one voice that never fell silent. Her voice, her memory, the memory of the smile, from the touch, the last time he held her face in his hands and promised, I'll be back for you." And it was this promise that he repeated every day, like a prayer, like a mantra, like a silent scream against everything that tried to destroy him. "I'll be back, Alina, I'll be back, no matter how, no matter when, I'll be back." Fellow soldiers looked at Victor differently. While some lost themselves in alcohol, playing cards, and empty conversations to escape their own pain, he isolated himself. He would pick up any piece of paper, any sliver of wood, anything he could write on. There wasn't always paint. He often wrote with charcoal, with the tip of a nail, or just pretended to write, moving his hand in the air, tracing invisible words. Because, deep down, it didn't matter whether the letter arrived or not. The act of writing, of talking to her, of connecting with her was, for him, what kept him sane, his humanity, his hope. And in the silence of war, he discovered that there is something much louder than the noise of bombs, bullets, and machine guns. Something that no army, no conflict, no death can silence. Love. Love. That was what made noise. Inside the chest, in the mind, in the soul. Love echoed louder than any explosion, stronger than any fear, more powerful than any silence. And as she clutched that red ribbon to her chest, looking up at the dark sky, she whispered one last time before closing her eyes that night, "Wait for me, Alina. Please, wait for me." Because even on the other side of the world, surrounded by war, he was still hers, totally hers, forever hers. Longing has a cruel way of lodging itself inside us. It doesn't come knocking on the door, it simply enters, it invades, it occupies every space, every corner, every thought. And, when we realize it, it is no longer just a pain, it is part of the body, part of the skin, part of the breath. For Alina, longing was no longer just a feeling, it was a presence, a constant shadow that followed her wherever she went, who sat next to her at breakfast, who walked with her on the way to the market, who lay with her every night, and who, most importantly, woke up with her every day, before the sun even rose. The bed, once full of life, now seemed bigger, cold, empty. The side where Victor used to lie seemed to carry such a physical emptiness that, sometimes, she would wake up in the middle of the night reaching out her hand, in the foolish hope of finding that warm body there, that embrace that made everything seem safe. But all she found was the cold sheet, and her own arm, clutching the pillow, as if trying to hold on to something that is no longer there. And in the midst of this emptiness, even breathing seemed to hurt, because my chest was tight, It was tight in a way that no air seemed to fit in anymore. And when the air came in, it came in cutting, tearing, as if each sigh was also a reminder that he wasn't there. At the back of the house, the letterbox became an altar, and every day she performed the same ritual. She woke up, put water on to boil, made his favorite tea, sat on the chair on the porch, and opened one of the letters. She read it slowly, savoring every word, every comma, every ink stain, as if, on that paper, he was still there, alive, present, breathing with her. "My love, it's cold here today, and I can't stop thinking about what it would be like if you were here, holding my hand, warming my chest," said one of the letters, handwritten, in his handwriting, crooked, nervous, hurried, but so incredibly his. And when he finished reading, he would press the paper to his chest, close his eyes and try, for a few seconds, to trick his own mind, to imagine that when he opened his eyes, he would be there, at the door, at the gate, at the bend in the road, with that backpack on his shoulder and that smile that always said more than any words. But when I opened my eyes, there was only silence, only emptiness, only longing. On the other side of the world, Victor carried his own cross, because if she missed him, if his absence tore at her soul, her absence in him hurt in a way that not even words could explain. And in the middle of the war, in the middle of the smell of gunpowder, blood, and mud, there was only one thing that made his heart not surrender: her. The red ribbon, now faded, dirty, worn, no longer even looked like a piece of fabric. It was more than that. It was an amulet. It was a refuge. It was, in some inexplicable way, her presence there, with him, in the middle of that hell. And every night, before closing his eyes, he would press that ribbon against his chest and whisper, "She's waiting for me. She's waiting for me, Alina." The problem was, sometimes even he wondered, what if I don't come back? What if this is my last sunrise? What if the last letter I wrote is all that's left of me? And it was in these thoughts that the weight of longing became almost unbearable, because it wasn't just the physical absence, it was the absence of the future. It was the fear that all the dreams, all the promises, all the conversations under the old oak tree, everything, would simply be nothing more than memories. Alina, in the village, spent her days as if crossing a minefield. Every step, a memory. Each object, a trigger. The smell of baking bread reminded me of breakfasts together. The swaying of the wind in the oak leaves brought back the whispers, the laughter, the plans they made. And, even in the silence of the night, she now seemed to repeat his name. "Victor," she whispered so many times, in the middle of the night, with her eyes open, staring at the ceiling, waiting without knowing exactly what. Maybe a miracle, maybe an answer, maybe, just maybe, the end of that pain. Because when you love someone so deeply, missing them isn't just pain, it's a fault that screams in the body, that corrodes from within, that it weighs so much, that sometimes even breathing hurts. But still, she breathed. It hurt, it tore, it tightened, but she breathed, because deep down, I knew that as long as there was still love, there was hope. And it was this hope, so fragile, so stubborn, so powerful, that made her get up every morning, open the window, look at the curve in the road, and, holding that red ribbon to her chest, whisper, "I'll wait for you, Victor, I'll wait for you, until the last day of my life, if necessary." In war, everything can be taken away. Security, peace, the floor, the future, all one thing less, words. And it was in them that Victor and Alina found the only weapon capable of overcoming what not even armies could defeat: time, distance, and pain itself. When the letter arrived, Alina could hardly believe it. She was in the yard, hanging out clothes, when she heard hurried footsteps on the road, the sound of someone running, stumbling, panting. She turned around, and there was the village boy, holding in his hands an envelope so crumpled, so dirty, that it looked like he had crossed hell itself to get to her. It's for you," he said, handing over, with dirty hands, the piece of paper that, at that moment, was worth more than any treasure in the world. Alina held the envelope, pressed it to her chest, and for a few seconds she couldn't move. Her legs were shaking, her heart was racing, beating so hard it felt like it was going to break her ribs. The air was trapped in her chest, her hands were sweating, and then, with trembling fingers, he broke the seal, opened the yellowed paper, and, when his eyes found the first line, the tears began to fall, uncontrollably, like rain that, after days trapped in the clouds, finally falls. My Alina, ... my life, ... my reason for everything. If you're reading this, it means that, somehow, I still exist, even if it's just here, in these words. I don't know if this letter arrived in time. I don't even know if you're still there, waiting for me. But if you are, ... please, ... keep going, because I'm the one who needs you to survive. Each word felt like a hug, a touch, a sigh from him. It was as if, for a few minutes, he was there, sitting on the kitchen chair, holding her hand, smiling in that crooked, shy way that only he knew how to do. The days here are darker than I imagined, and the nights ... are even worse. But, even in the midst of this horror, there is one thing that no one has been able to take away from me. You live here, inside me, in every heartbeat, in every thought, in every dream, and it is for you that I get up every day. It is for you that I breathe. It is for you that I am still able to smile, even when everything around me screams for me to give up. Her hands clutched the paper so tightly that it crumpled, and even as she cried, she smiled, because those words were life. They were everything. They were much more than ink on paper. They were an invisible thread pulling him closer, as if, somehow, the entire universe had bent so that, even if only for an instant, their love would win the war. If I survived this far, it's because you live in me, because you hold me, even from afar, because every time fear grips me, I close my eyes and go back. I go back to the village. I go back to our tree. I go back to you, sitting on the bench in the square, smiling at me as if nothing in the world were more beautiful than that moment. And for the first time in weeks, maybe months, Alina breathed differently. It was as if that paper had given her back her air, given her back her ground, given her back everything. The pain was still there. The longing was greater than ever. The fear was still pressing. But now, there was something stronger than all that. The certainty that he was still there, that he was still fighting, that he still loved her. On the other hand, Victor, when he wrote that letter, knew that it might be his only chance, that maybe it was the last one, so he poured everything into her, everything he was carrying, everything I felt, everything he didn't have the courage to keep to himself. I love you, Alina, more than any words in this world can attempt to describe, more than any time, any distance, any war. And if I don't come back, if for some reason this letter is all that's left of me, ... I want you to know, you were, you are, and always will be ... the love of my life. Alina clutched the paper to her chest, fell to her knees on the floor, and, looking up at the sky, as if speaking directly to it, whispered, through tears, you'll come back to me ... I know ... I feel it. I'll wait for you, Victor ... as long as it takes. My whole life, if necessary. And that night, she slept hugging that letter, like someone who embraces their own life. Because, even from a distance, even in the middle of everything ... those words saved. They saved him. They saved her. They saved love. And as long as there was love ... there would be hope. In the world, there were two battlefields. One made of mud, gunpowder, trenches, and fear. The other, of silence, loneliness, and longing. But, in both, there was the same resistance, the same strength, the same fight. The fight of two hearts that, separated by kilometers, by bombs, by borders, and by destiny itself, still beat to the same beat. They still fought for the same promise, not to let love die. Victor woke up every day to the sound of gunshots, hurried orders, screams muffled by explosions. But before he even opened his eyes, his mind raced faster than any bullet to her, to Alina, to that piece of the world he left behind, but which he never, not for a second, stopped carrying inside his chest. In the midst of the mud, the burning cold, the aching hunger, he held the red ribbon to his chest. He held it tight, as if he were holding his own soul, because, in the end, that was what it had become. The ribbon, the memories, the letters, they were more than just memories. They were fuel. They were resistance. They were what kept him putting one foot in front of the other, even when his whole body was asking him to fall. I'll come back. I'll come back to you. I'll come back to us, he repeated, like a mantra, like a prayer, like an oath, stronger than any oath he had ever made before in his life. On the other side, Alina was fighting a different war. The war against emptiness, against absence, against the hours that seemed to never pass, against the fear that, from time to time, knocked on the door in the form of dark thoughts, and that she, with all her strength, needed to expel, scare away, silence. But no matter how much it hurt, she wouldn't give up. Every day, she put the ribbon in her hair, lit the porch lamp, sat in the rocking chair, and stared down the bend in the road. She didn't know if he would come back that day, or the next, or the day after that. Maybe he would never come back. But as long as there was still a chance, no matter how small, she would wait. She would wait until her last glimmer of hope, until her last breath, until her last day. Because, deep down, she knew the love they built was not just any love. It was not a love of fairy tales, of paper, of empty promises. It was a love of the roots, of the soul, of two hearts that, since they were children, since the first glance rescued in the field, were made for each other. If you hear me, Victor. If, in some way, you feel this, know that I'm waiting for you. I'm waiting for you, until I don't know how to wait anymore. Because there is no time that can make me forget you. There is no distance that can make me leave you behind. And so, the days became resistance, the nights, prayer, each letter, a breath, each memory, a brick in the fortress that, even invisible, kept that love standing. There were, yes, days when she would fall apart, days when the weight on her chest was so heavy that even getting out of bed seemed impossible, days when she would look at the horizon and, for seconds, just seconds, she would doubt, what if he doesn't come back? The thought came like a whisper, but she would squash it before it could gain strength, because to doubt was to allow the war to win, and she refused. On his side, it was no different. There were days when the sound of the bombs seemed louder than any thought, days when the faces of those who fell beside him were etched in his memory, days when fear made his hands tremble so much that even holding a pen seemed impossible. But through all those days, there was a thread that wouldn't break, a promise that wouldn't die. Them, their love, their lives. The certainty that as long as one still breathed, the other would never truly be alone. And, even though they were separated, even though they lived in two worlds so far apart, the struggle was the same. The fight of not forgetting, of not giving up, of not allowing war, time, distance, or destiny to destroy that which they themselves did not know how it was born, but which they knew, with all the strength they had, was impossible to tear away. I'll be back, Alina. I'll be back for you. And when I'm back, we'll plant that garden. We'll have our own house, our windows facing the sunset, our own sunflowers in the yard. And when this nightmare is over, I'll never let you go. Never again, he wrote. Each word stronger than any rifle, more powerful than any bomb. And, on the other side, she held that letter, pressed it against her chest, looked at the sky and answered, quietly, almost like a secret blown to the wind, and I'll be here, waiting for you, because loving you is the most right thing I've ever done in my life. Two hearts, one fight, and a promise that, even when everything seemed to fall apart, never died. But this story is not over yet. In fact, the most anticipated moment is yet to come. After facing the pain of separation, the silence of war, the longing that almost destroyed them, the moment arrives that can change everything. But has love really survived? Will it come back? Is she still there, waiting? Part 3 brings the most exciting chapter of this story, the reunion, the hug that was promised, or who knows, the hug that never happened. If you've made it this far, prepare your heart, because what's coming next, will bring tears to your eyes. It will make you believe that when love is true, neither war, nor time, nor pain are capable of winning. Turn on notifications, subscribe, because the last part of this story will be marked in your soul forever.